Wonderful to see that most of you all are being back. Good to see Brother and Sister Worley, that they're well enough to be here. They are an encouragement to us without a doubt. And it's good to see Carla. I don't know about the encouragement part, but it is good to see her. She would expect me to say nothing less than something like that. But glad that she's well enough to be here as well. Let's keep the three of them definitely in our prayers. A little while ago, I preached a sermon from James chapter 1, verse 19. The importance of let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. But there is a brother in this congregation who said some not very kind things to me this morning. He mentioned that he was glad that I had a cold, that I was sick, so I wouldn't be too close to him. And now, I'm not going to name his name. His initial starts with J. Yeah, that's what it is. So knowing that and realizing that sermon went in one ear and out the other as quickly as I said it, I thought the sermon tonight would be titled Taming the Tongue with a question mark on the end of it, because it's impossible. Have your Bibles, let's turn to James chapter 3. James chapter 3 and read verses 1 through 8. My brethren, be not many masters, knowing that we shall receive the greater condemnation. For in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same as a perfect man, and able also to bridle the whole body. Behold, we put bits in the horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn about their whole body. Behold also the ships, which though they be so great, and are driven of fierce winds, yet are they not turned about with a very small helm, whithersoever the governor listeth. Even so the tongue is a little member, and boasteth great things. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire of hell. For every kind of beasts, and of birds, and of serpents, and of things in the sea is tamed, but hath been tamed of mankind. But the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. And truly that is, without a doubt, the way it is. It's the way it is since the dawn of time. It is the way it is in our time as well. It's amazing how this tiny little member can cause so much strife, but also at the same time commit so much goodwill to the teaching and the preaching of the gospel of Christ. It is estimated the average person speaks about 6,000 words a day. That's a lot of words to me. I guess some days a little less, some people speak a little less, some even more. But 6,000 words a day. Not surprising, God's telling us the importance of controlling it. Can't tame it, but it is possible with His help to control it. And it's not surprising why James would write so much about the tongue, about our speech. James has often been referred to as the Proverbs of the New Testament. And we think about Proverbs, Solomon wrote also quite a bit about the tongue and about the speech that we should have and the speech that we should not have as well. As a song that we just sang aptly stated, angry words, oh, let them never from the tongue unbridled slip. What is the best impulse of the heart? It's not the way of the world. The best impulse of the heart is to check those angry words before, as the song states, they soil the lip. And we've all have said at one time or another in our lives, and if you're married, you men understand this as well as anybody, probably better than anybody. Once you say something that you shouldn't have said, it's too late. You can ask God to forgive you. You can ask the person to forgive you. But if it's a wife, in the case with my father, with my mother, she didn't let him forget that for decades. She would bring that up from time to time. What a memory. So let's look at controlling the tongue and the possibility of that, and it is a possibility. James gives 3 illustrations in this chapter. One would be a bit in a horse's mouth. And you think about this tiny bit and a horse, say it weighs 1,000 pounds. It will get it to stop on a dime. That little bit will turn that horse to the left or to the right, wherever that person wants to go. And it talks about a helm or a rudder. The same thing. You think of some of these cruise ships, huge vessels, a couple 100,000 tons. And yet, this tiny little helm, this rudder, will get this huge vessel to turn one way or the other. And be careful that you don't turn it too fast, because people will fall to the deck. Then there's the human tongue. Proverbs 18:21, the first part of that verse states, death and life are in the power of the tongue. Death and life, the power of the tongue. Small member compared to the rest of the body, but what great influence. You think some of the challenging words that have been stated over the years, challenging people and nations to be better citizens. But then you also think of angry words. Caused anger. Anger blossomed into violence. In a lot of cases, that violence turned into an actual war because of words, angry words. Words that cause such derision. Small member, big problems. James also uses the illustration of a spark causing a large fire. If you've lived out west, you know the dangers of forest fires. They have them out here too, but in the southeast, but nothing like out there. When you're averaging about 14 inches of rain a year, I mean, you can get that one day here, or a matter of hours. But 14 inches of rain a year, you're living in a semi-arid. Someone driving down the road and this is taking place, throws a cigarette out the window, and it's June, and it's in July, and it's in August, and there's just not been much rain, a fire takes off. And it will burn hundreds, sometimes thousands of acres. People will lose their homes, and sometimes people lose their lives. It's happened out there. Just one tiny little spark, and the mistake of throwing it out of the window. Verse 8 again. But the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil. Animals can be, but the tongue cannot be tamed. But we can control it. I've brought this up before, and you've heard it numerous times. Someone will say when they misspoke, well, I didn't think before I spoke. That's impossible. Try doing that. You can't do it. However, you may have not thought as long as you should have. So we'll always have to be on guard. Proverbs 13:3, he that keepeth his mouth keepeth his life, but he that openeth wide his lips shall have destruction. And so it is. Swift to hear, slow to speak, James 1:19. What is the control room for the tongue, for our speech? It's the heart. And the heart, it's up here. It's not in our chest, physical heart, but our heart, the way we think, everything revolves around it. Everything comes from the heart. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. Matthew 12:34. Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Proverbs 4:23. Thy word have I hid in mine heart, that I might not sin against thee. Psalm 119:11. Powerful passage. Thy word have I hid. And we need to hide God's word in our heart. The English Standard Version, which was spoken of earlier today, the ESV defines this word hid differently. It translates it as stored up. Thayer defines the word hid as to store up. Think of it that way. How good will it be if we store up God's words in our heart? We'll be better New Testament Christians, won't we? We'll be careful what we say. We'll think before we speak. Store them up. Secondly, how can the tongue be used for evil? When I was working on this sermon Tuesday, I couldn't help but think of the poem, Let Me Count the Ways. I had no clue where that saying came from. Elizabeth Barrett Browning wrote a poem back in the 1800s. She was English. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. When we think about the tongue and the problems that can come about with tongue, the things that are said that are wrong to say, that are sinful to say, let us count the ways of how it can be used for evil and not even come close to true numbers. It can be used for cursing, evil speaking, lying, jesting, whispering, gossip, backbiting, boasting, deceit, reviling, false teaching, speaking idle words, blasphemy, filthy speech, cuss words, in other words, which we deal with today. James chapter 3, verse 8, the American Standard Version, it is a restless evil. I like that. A restless evil. Kind of reminds me of Satan, who's always walking about seeking whom he may devour, I should say. Of course, he does desire our souls, doesn't he? But he's always on the prowl. That's why we need to be watchful for our tongue, to guard it. Keep thy tongue from evil and thy lips from speaking guile, Psalm 34:13. All of these things on the list that I just mentioned, and even more that you can probably add to it right now, those are things of the world. Those are things that should stay in the world. They shouldn't stay in us. They shouldn't be in us as New Testament Christians. But living in the world It would be foolish for us to think that we will not be influenced at all by the world, by the language of it, by the filth that comes out of so many people's mouths these days. It doesn't matter where you go. People are always cussing like there's no tomorrow. I remember a time when that was not that way. And usually when someone cussed, they were thought of as someone who wasn't very bright, not taught, not very educated. If that saying is true, what does that say about America? Not very educated anymore. Not even close. But it's everywhere. You think about movies, how they have changed. You know, there was a time that they didn't have cussing in movies. Gone with the Wind was the first time. My mother said that when that word, cuss word, was spoken, the whole audience gasped, shocked. Now, you're lucky if that's all they say. Television programs, sitcoms, supposed to be full of comedy, are full of filthy language. Do you think Hollywood does this on purpose? If you don't, you need to rethink that. They know exactly what they are doing. They've been pushing that envelope for years, and they will continue to. There's the old saying, monkey see, monkey do. So they're showing us what we are to say and how we should act, and they want us to do those things. I remember a number of years ago, I checked a movie out of the library. It won an Oscar, which doesn't say much anymore. But I liked the actors and the actors that were in it. So I put it in the DVD player and I started to listen to it, and guess what you started to hear? Cussing from the get-go. And you think, well, it's going to stop. It didn't. So it got ejected and returned. You don't want to hear that. We shouldn't want to hear that. But we can be influenced by the world to such a degree that we don't think that much of it. That filth is coming out of people's language, out of their mouths. And that's what it is, folks. It's filth. Plain and simple. And when you hear it from a child, 6 years old, or even younger, where did they learn that language? Are you old enough to have sucked on a bar of soap? Was it a swear word? I wouldn't be here. They would have killed me. But I said something I shouldn't have said. It wasn't pleasant. It didn't taste good at all. And I never did it again, not at least around my mother. Living in the world, you think about Lot, and you think about filthy language. Filthy language will, without a doubt, if our heart is right, it will vex our righteous soul day after day. We don't want to be around it. But we don't want to be like the southern kingdom of Judah in Jeremiah's day. The sin was so rampant. They had given into it to such a degree. I believe it's Jeremiah 6:15. If it's not that verse, start in Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 1, and begin to read. That will do you good. But it talks how they couldn't even blush anymore. We need to be careful that that doesn't happen to us. All of us do. Members, elders, preachers, All need to beware of that. We should be able to blush. We should be ashamed. But however, our influence can have an influence with those in the world for good. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, but ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. And there's no doubt if we act this way, if we set the right example, if our speech is godly speech, they will probably think of us as peculiar. That's not what that word means right there. Can we have an influence upon people that we work with? By our godly lifestyle? By our speech? Make no mistake about it, you will. They will see the difference. We probably all experience that in our lives when they find out that you are a Christian and they let a word slip. I've had them apologize to me. They're starting to notice a difference. And maybe because of that, they will obey the gospel. Maybe it not while we're there. Maybe years down the road because of an example. They will obey the gospel. Let your speech be always, not some of the time, always with grace, seasoned with salt, that ye may know how ye ought to answer every man. Colossians 4:6. I'm trying to cut back on the salt. I don't really like that. I like salt. Salt is pleasant. Salt makes things taste better. So should our speech. Let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may minister grace unto the hearers. Ephesians 4:29. Again, anger can lead us to say things we wish we hadn't said. As soon as they escape our mouth, we're sorry for it. Better to be angry and sin not, as Ephesians 4:26 tells us. It has the power to destroy. You think about the hurt, the danger of telling a lie about an individual. I know from talking with other preachers, people have told lies about preachers. Sometimes people will tell lies about congregations. So-and-so did this, so-and-so did that. In the world that we live in, lies are told all the time. That's why I don't listen to the news anymore. But they're great at it. But even when a lie has been proven to be just that, it's false, it wasn't the truth, a lot of times a person's life has been destroyed. Their reputation has been destroyed. Maybe they will lose that job too late. And even with brethren, there may still be a lingering doubt of, well, maybe that was some truth in that after all. That's the problem with lying. Of the 7 things that God hates, Solomon wrote about in Proverbs chapter 6. One was a lying tongue, the other was a false witness that speaketh lies, in verse 17 and verse 19 of that chapter. Now, if God hates that, should we? And he hates that. There is a human proverb, don't know who said this. It sounded something like something Mark Twain would say. But through studying this, most people believe that he didn't. So no one exactly knows who coined the phrase. It states, a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on his shoes. You know what? That's exactly correct. That's a good proverb. And that's how the world is. People want to hear bad news. People want to hear gossip. People want to hear a lie and believe in it. The truth is still putting on its shoes. Lies halfway around the world. There are some things that do not change. Nothing new under the sun, Solomon stated. Deliver my soul, O Lord, from lying lips and from a deceitful tongue, Psalm 120, verse 2. But we need to remember what happens to liars. All liars shall have their part in the lake which burneth with fire and brimstone. In this sermon, I had typed it up as Revelation 22, verse 8. And I thought, that's not right. This is a passage that I quoted to my dad almost daily. It's Revelation 21, verse 8. He wasn't lying. He just had a way of stretching the truth. And he stretched it. James was right. Be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. Well, let's notice a few things before we close. How a tongue can be used for much good, a lot of good. It can be. Psalm 35, verse 28. David wrote, and my tongue shall speak of thy righteousness and of thy praise all the day long. Shouldn't that be the Christian's attitude? Shouldn't we feel that way? I remember his statement, I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. When we're here and we're worshiping, do you ever think about, I am so happy that I'm here. This is the most important place right now to be. Be worshiping our God with other saints who feel the same exact way. No better place in the world. In James chapter 3, verse 1, let's go over that passage again. My brethren, be not many masters, knowing that we shall receive the greater condemnation. Masters. Better the word would be teachers. Be not many teachers. We need to be careful what we teach, how we teach it. Why? There's a heavier judgment upon those who do teach it. So be careful. Don't rush into this. Understand what you're getting into. Every time a preacher stands up to preach the word, excited, absolutely. Nervous, without a doubt. As one brother told me, it's because you know what you are presenting is not your words, it's God's words. So you want to make sure you get it right. But a heavier judgment will come upon them. Also notice with me 2 Peter chapter 2. Let's read verses 1 through 3. 2 Peter 2, 1 through 3. But there were false prophets also among the people, even as there shall be false teachers among you, who privily shall bring in damnable heresies, even denying the Lord that bought them, and bring upon themselves swift destruction. Another problem with this, verse 2, and many shall follow their pernicious ways, by reason of whom the way of truth shall be evil spoken of. And through covetousness, shall they with vain words make merchandise of you, whose judgment now of a long time lingereth not, and their damnation slumbereth not. False teachers. They're in it for the money. That's the business. Romans 16:18. They are there to make merchandise of you. They don't care about you at all. They don't care about your soul one whit. But they do care about your contribution. So one of the reasons they teach is to lead souls astray, to preach those smooth things. And people a lot of times like smooth things. They like being lied to. They don't want to hear the truth. Be not many teachers. False teachers will lead those who believe them, who want to follow after their pernicious ways, to a devil's hell. Are there different degrees of hell? I believe so. I truly believe that is the case. And for false teachers, for what they are teaching that is not God's holy word, but the exact opposite of it, and leading these innocent souls to a devil's hell, I think that fire is going to be stoked as hot as it can be. And they will be there for all eternity. So we need to be careful not to be many teachers. Not telling us not to be teachers, but be careful. A heavier judgment will come upon you. Not only that, teachers can set the right example as well. One of the reasons the scribes and the Pharisees hated Jesus so much is he pointed out how they didn't do those things. They were not setting the right examples. And speaking to the people one day, the common people, Matthew 23:3, all therefore, whatsoever they bid you, observe. That observe. And of course, do. But do not ye after their works, for they say and do not the truth. Paul told the young preacher Timothy to take heed unto thyself and unto the doctrine. Continue in them, for in doing this thou shalt both save thyself and them that hear thee. 1 Timothy 4:16. Do we get that? What was Timothy to do before he could start teaching others and bring them to Christ? He had to know the Scriptures. He had to abide by it, the doctrine of Christ. He had to be obedient to it. Then, and only then, could he teach it to others. That's a powerful passage. For the tongue to be used for good, the greatest good, is the euangelion. It's the gospel. It's the good news. We are all to be teachers. But we need to be able to practice what we do teach. Set the right example before all. And the things that thou hast heard of me, also to Timothy, and the things that thou hast heard of me, among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men who shall be able to teach others also. 2 Timothy 2, verse 2. Powerful text, without a doubt. One word that has always crept out to me is that word same. Paul's telling Timothy, what you know from amongst many witnesses, what I have always preached, which was the gospel, and he preached it wherever he went, the same thing, That's what Timothy was also to preach, that same message, the gospel of Christ. Teach it to others, they would obey the gospel, and then they would be able to turn around and preach the same thing. I can remember the time, and so many of you do as well, when you're traveling across the country and you go and you worship in the Church of Christ, you heard the same thing there that you heard at home. You heard the Bible being taught in Bible class, and you heard the Bible being preached from the pulpit. Always the same. Never any difference. That's what this old preacher is telling the younger one. Same thing. Preach the gospel of Christ. That's how souls are saved. You know, there's nothing mysterious about the gospel of Christ. Really isn't. Nothing miraculous, nothing mind-boggling, nothing stupendous. It's pretty simple. Basically written on a 6th grade invitation. 6th graders can understand it, in other words. That's how souls are saved. It's the gospel. It is the power of God unto salvation, Romans 1:16. It's the only power by which someone can be saved. I wished the world understood that. There wouldn't be a denomination. There would not be an unfaithful congregation if they truly believed and practiced that. It's not from building a large gymnasium. It doesn't come about by that. You don't save souls by that. It's not by bake sales. It's not by raffling a Harley Davidson motorcycle in the foyer of a congregation. That happened out in Phoenix one time. They actually did that. That's not how you save souls. It's not by feeding and clothing the poor. You know what the poor need more than anything? The gospel of Christ. That'll set them straight. That will set them on the path to get out of that homelessness, that cycle of homelessness. Because they'll put down the drugs, they'll put down the alcohol. But that's just too simple. That makes just too much sense. But it's the good news. There's a number of ways the tongue can be used as well, and used for good. Solomon stated, "A soft answer turneth away wrath," Proverbs 15:1. In any form of law enforcement, I used to think law enforcement was just police officers, but it's a wider spectrum than that. But any form of law enforcement, they teach you, they have classes how to de-escalate a situation. You may come in and meet someone who is just angry, furious over something. They may yell at you. They may talk about your ancestors in not a good way. The worst thing you can do is yell back. Adam Clark, in his commentary on Proverbs 15:1, stated, "Kindness produces kindness. Rage produces rage." So if you yell back at that individual, oh, you just set a torch to it. They were already torched. You're just making it worse. But if you're calm, in many cases, not always, but they teach you to be calm, keep your voice low, and ask them, what is the problem? Because they came in there because of a problem. What is the problem? How can we answer that problem? And a lot of times, their tone drops. They've finally found someone who wants to hear. But not always. But whether they do or not, as Christians, that is without a doubt how we are to react. We are told to consider one another, to provoke and to love and to good works. Hebrews 10:24. I like to provoke people sometimes. There's one sitting in that row right there I like to provoke. But this is in a good way, in a godly way. And we should. We know the importance of provoking or encouraging people to do good works. But do we ever overlook that word consider earlier in that passage? We are to consider one another? We shouldn't. That's powerful too. Consider. We should consider, we should regard other members in these spiritual affairs. Conclusion. Tongue is full of unruly evil, restless evil. I like that. That's what it is. It is restless. We can't put a bridle on it. That is possible. We can control what comes out of our mouth. It'll take work. We may never get it down to what some people call a science, but we can improve on it. Never can tame it, but with God's help we can control it and be used for a number of good things. Not just for evil, but for good. One of the things that we can use the tongue for is to confess that we believe that Jesus is the Christ. He is the Son of God. That's the good confession that one can make before they obey the gospel. They're baptized and forgiven of their sins. They're remitted. And sometimes it is to confess of sin in our life. That we go to God in prayer, sometimes privately. Sometimes we go to another person and confess to them. Sometimes it's before the whole congregation because the whole congregation knows of it. But that's also a good way. But to praise his name in everything that we do, verbally and how we live. If you need to respond to the invitation this evening, we pray that you will. Let's all stand and sing.